The clinking of wine glasses and bursts of laughter echoed across the chandelier-lit banquet hall, where polished tables draped in ivory linen sat neatly arranged for the yearly family reunion. I had barely stepped inside when I heard it, clear, sharp, and cruel enough to slice through the hum of conversations. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell us where are you from and from which city you're watching our videos. And after watching the whole video, don't forget to tell us, what would you do in this situation? Be honest. Tell me in the comments below. We read every comment. Let's begin. There she is, my cousin Lauren sneered, her voice loud enough for half the room to hear. The family failure finally showed up. Heads turned. Some cousins exchanged smirks. Others simply looked down at their plates as though silence absolved them from complicity. My sister, Allison, folded her manicured hands around her champagne glass, her lips curling in that same practiced smirk she'd worn since childhood. Honestly, she added, her voice carrying across the table, I can't believe she even had the nerve to come. No career, no achievements, nothing worth mentioning. The words hung heavy, mocking, amplified by the chorus of chuckles. That followed. My stomach twisted, but I didn't flinch. I sat down, spine straight, lips pressed in a small, polite smile. I'd learned the hard way that silence sometimes spoke louder than fury. Still, their voices wouldn't stop. Failure, Lauren repeated, her earrings catching the light as she leaned forward, almost savoring the humiliation. At least she can say she made an appearance. That's the most we've seen from her all year. My palms tightened around my glass, the condensation dripping down my fingers, but I didn't give them the satisfaction of a retort. I sipped my water and stared at the flicker of candles, willing myself to remain calm. And then, like thunder cracking through a storm, the sound of a cane striking hardwood silenced the room, Grandpa. He pushed himself up from the head table, his hands trembling slightly on the polished wooden cane, but his eyes, sharp, fiery, and full of authority, commanded every glance in the room. His voice was gravel, but it carried like fire. Failure? His gaze swept across the table, settling on Lauren and Allison. The silence grew suffocating. Failure? Then tell me why the only person worth celebrating tonight is the very one you mock. A stunned hush blanketed the banquet hall. The smug laughter evaporated, replaced by whispers and uneasy shifting. My heart hammered, my throat tightened, but my eyes locked on Grandpa's, glistening with something fierce and unyielding, and in that moment, I knew the tide had turned. All eyes locked on Grandpa as he stood tall despite the tremor in his legs, the gold tip of his cane pressing against the wooden floor like a judge's gavel demanding order. His voice didn't shake, though. If anything, it grew stronger with each word. You sit here, he said, his piercing gaze sweeping across the family table, mocking her, tearing her down with your smug laughter and cheap words. But what have you done? What have you built? The room was still, as if the chandeliers above were holding their breath. My cousin Ryan shifted uncomfortably, tugging at his designer tie, while Lauren's smile faltered for the first time all evening. Allison, of course, tried to recover with a scoff. Oh, come on, Grandpa, she said lightly, though her voice carried an edge of panic. We're just being honest. She's never had anything to show. No promotion, no big career, no house, no family. She's enough. The word boomed from Grandpa's throat like a hammer striking iron. His hand slammed against the table, rattling the silverware. Allison flinched, her lips snapping shut. Grandpa leaned forward, his voice sharp, each syllable a blade. While you measure success in shallow titles and bank accounts, she's been carrying burdens you can't even begin to imagine. She didn't ask for applause, she didn't ask for pity, and she sure as hell doesn't need your approval. The weight of his words settled like a storm cloud. My chest tightened. A part of me wanted to cry. Another part wanted to run, but I forced myself to hold still, to absorb every word. Lauren finally found her voice, though weaker than before. So what? Are you saying failure is something to celebrate now? Grandpa turned to her, his stare like steel. Failure? Do you even know what failure looks like? Failure is hiding behind fake smiles and credit cards you didn't earn. Failure is parading yourself as successful while your parents pay your bills. Failure is having every advantage handed to you and still leaving nothing meaningful behind. The bye. Words landed like blows. Ryan shifted in his seat again, his jaw tight, and I noticed Aunt Denise whispering furiously into her husband's ear. The room had cracked open, exposing truths no one dared admit before. Then Grandpa's voice softened, though the strength never left it. But her? She is not the failure. She is the one who worked nights to keep the lights on. She is the one who showed up for me when doctors said I wouldn't last another year. She is the one who— He stopped, his eyes glistening as he looked directly at me. My throat tightened. She is the one who saved me. Gasps rippled across the room. My— Cousins exchanged wide-eyed glances. Allison's face drained of color. What? What do you mean? She stammered. Grandpa steadied himself with his cane and looked at the family as though laying down a verdict. Last year, when my heart gave out, when the rest of you were too busy with your parties, your vacations, your endless excuses, she was the one who drove through the night, sat by my side in the hospital, and signed the papers that none of you even bothered to read. She made the decisions that kept me alive. Silence. Not a sound. Just the echo of truth filling the air. Like thunder. I felt my own breath hitch. I hadn't wanted anyone to know. I hadn't done it for recognition. I did it because he was my grandfather, because I loved him, because family should mean more than competition. But hearing him say it aloud in that room, in front of those who mocked me, felt like the earth itself had shifted. Grandpa's hand trembled as he raised his glass, his voice steady once more. So yes, if this family must celebrate someone tonight, it won't be the ones flaunting false success. It will be her. Because when it mattered most, she didn't run. She stood. The words detonated through the banquet hall. A few relatives lowered their heads in shame. Others couldn't meet my gaze. Lauren sat frozen, her cheeks blotched red, while Allison bit her lip so hard I thought it might bleed. For the first time all night, I let myself breathe. Not a loud, defiant breath, but one that carried quiet power. Because the truth was no longer hidden. It stood in the open, undeniable. But Grandpa wasn't finished. His voice grew sharper, colder. And while you all sat in comfort, mocking, she was also building something none of you even bothered to ask about. Something that, when revealed, will make your little titles and careers look like toys. The entire table stiffened. Even I froze, staring at him in disbelief. He hadn't told me he planned to say that. The silence grew unbearable. My pulse pounded as my relatives exchanged suspicious, anxious glances. Allison finally snapped, her voice shaky but loud. What do you mean, Grandpa? What has she been building? Grandpa smiled faintly, a storm brewing in his eyes. He lifted his glass higher, his cane striking the floor once again. That, he said, his voice calm yet razor-sharp, is for her to tell you. When she's ready. The room erupted into whispers, the air thick with tension. And suddenly, all those who called me a failure were looking at me differently. Nervous, curious, unsettled, and for the first time in years, I wasn't the one shrinking under their gaze. They were. The banquet hall felt like it had been split in two. On one side, my cousins whispering with wide eyes, suddenly unsure of themselves. On the other, my aunts and uncles stealing uneasy glances at me, as though they were seeing someone entirely new. Allison finally broke the silence. Her voice was tight, almost desperate. What is this supposed to mean? Some kind of game? She doesn't have anything. She can barely keep herself together. How could she possibly be building something worth celebrating? I stayed quiet, my fingers wrapped around my glass so firmly I thought it might shatter. My heart thundered in my chest, not from fear, but from the strange power of watching their certainty crumble. Grandpa didn't answer her. Instead, his sharp eyes turned toward me. "Well, sweetheart," he said, his voice gentler now, "are you ready to tell them?" My throat felt dry, but something inside me hardened. I glanced at Lauren, who was glaring at me like a cornered animal. At Allison, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to hide her panic behind another sip of champagne. And then at Grandpa, who gave the faintest nod. I took a slow breath. "You all mocked me for years," I said, my voice steady but low, forcing the room into silence. "Every family dinner, every holiday, every time I showed up, you couldn't wait to point out what I wasn't. No promotion, no husband, no kids, no success you could measure." I paused, my eyes sweeping across the table. "But while you were busy keeping score, I was working. Quietly, patiently. And now?" I leaned back, letting the words hang. "Now I don't need to explain myself, because soon every single one of you will see it." The room buzzed with whispers, tension twisting like barbed wire through the air. Lauren scoffed, though her voice cracked. "Please, you expect us to believe you're suddenly some kind of big shot? Stop pretending. You're nothing. Always have been." Before I could reply, Grandpa's cane slammed against the floor again. "Enough!" His voice cut through like a blade. He turned to Lauren, his eyes cold. "You think I don't know where your so-called success comes from? How many times your parents bailed you out of debt? How many jobs you quit after a month because it was too hard? You sit there mocking her while your entire life hangs by a thread." Lauren's face flushed scarlet. "That's not true," she snapped, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. Grandpa pressed on. "And you, Allison." He turned his stare to my sister. "Always the star. Always the one who thought she had it all. Tell me, where were you when I needed someone? At the hospital? Where were you when the family's businesses were drowning in red ink? Off at another gala? Another vacation? Another self-promotion?" Allison's lips parted, but no words came out. The silence exposed her more than any denial could. I finally spoke again, my voice sharper this time. "You call me a failure because it's easier than admitting you've lived off illusions. But what you never understood is that true strength doesn't need an audience. I don't need you to clap for me. I don't need you to approve of me." The words rolled off my tongue like they'd been waiting years to be spoken. My chest burned with both anger and release. Cousin Ryan leaned forward suddenly, his jaw tight. "So what is it then?" he demanded, his voice dripping with contempt. "What have you been hiding that's supposed to impress us so much?" I met his glare and smiled faintly, the kind of smile that unsettles rather than comforts. "You'll find out soon enough." The whispers grew louder now, waves of doubt and curiosity crashing around the table. No one laughed anymore. The smugness was gone, replaced by unease. Grandpa lifted his glass again, his voice low but commanding. "Tonight was meant to remind this family what it means to stand for something. Not money, not vanity, but loyalty. Sacrifice. Grit. And whether you like it or not, she has all of that in spades. More than the rest of you combined." The sting of his words left the room suffocating in silence. Some of my relatives couldn't meet my eyes. Others stared like I'd grown into someone unrecognizable. Allison's hand shook as she set her glass down, her perfectly polished nails clicking against the crystal. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You think you're better than us now?" I leaned in, locking eyes with her, my voice steady. "No, I don't think I'm better than you. I just don't need to prove myself to you anymore. And that's what scares you." Her face drained. Of color. For once, she had no comeback. The room sat heavy with that truth. And though part of me wanted to soften, to ease the blow, Another part of me knew this moment had been a long time coming. Because in that hall, under those bright chandeliers, the balance of power had shifted. I wasn't the one being measured anymore. They were, and the night was far from over. The tension in the room was suffocating. You could almost hear hearts pounding beneath the crystal chandeliers. My relatives sat stiff, their eyes darting between me and Grandpa as if waiting for a verdict. The word failure no longer floated in the air. It had dissolved into silence, replaced by a single gnawing question. What had I been hiding? Grandpa let the silence stretch before he spoke. "Since you're all so desperate to know," he said, his cane tapping once more against the hardwood floor, "I'll tell you what she's been building." He paused deliberately, letting the moment hang like a storm about to break. "While you were mocking her, she was starting something of her own. From scratch. No inheritance, no favors, no shortcuts. She built a company." Gasps rippled through the hall. I sat frozen, my chest tight, while the others shifted uneasily. Lauren's jaw dropped. Allison's hand shot to her mouth. Grandpa's voice rose, each word slicing through the tension. "Not a hobby, not a side project. A real company, employing dozens of people, generating more revenue than any of your so-called achievements combined. She didn't flaunt it because she doesn't need validation from you. But make no mistake, she is the only one at this table who's truly earned her success." The room erupted in whispers. My uncles leaned into one another. My cousins exchanged stunned glances. Ryan shook his head furiously. "That's impossible. If she really had something like that, we'd know about it. She wouldn't be able to keep it a secret." Grandpa smirked. "That's where you're wrong. Real power doesn't always scream. Sometimes it waits in silence until the moment is right." Allison's voice cracked as she tried to regain control. "So what? We're supposed to believe she's suddenly better than all of us? That her little company makes her the star of this family?" I finally spoke, my voice steady and calm, though my pulse thundered. "I don't need to be the star. That's never been my goal. But I'll no longer sit here and let you define me as a failure. Not when I've built something with my own two hands, while you were too busy mocking me to notice." Grandpa's gaze swept across the table, sharp and unforgiving. "You call her a failure, but let me be clear. The only failure tonight is this family's blindness. You've measured her against shallow standards for years, and in doing so, you revealed more about your own emptiness than about her worth." The words hit harder than any slap. No one dared speak. Some lowered their eyes to their plates, others shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Lauren whispered bitterly, "This changes nothing." But she was wrong. I could feel it. The air itself had shifted, the weight of years of humiliation finally breaking apart. For the first time, they weren't laughing. They were facing me, and the truth. Grandpa raised his glass high, his voice steady, final. "Tonight, we celebrate her. Because she is proof that strength doesn't come from privilege, or money handed down, or empty titles. It comes from grit, sacrifice, and perseverance. And whether you like it or not, she is the only one here who's earned respect." His words left no room for argument. The room was silent, heavy with unspoken shame. I looked around the table, meeting each of their eyes one by one. The same people who once smirked at me now shifted beneath my gaze. They couldn't dismiss me anymore. They couldn't erase me. And as I raised my own glass, a quiet smile tugging at my lips, I said softly, "To failure." Their faces froze. I let the pause linger before finishing. Because without it, I would have never built the strength that made me who I am today. The hall was silent again, but it wasn't the silence of mockery this time. It was the silence of realization. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt untouchable. And they knew it.